Now, if we are not given a 0, then we have to find them. So with a problem like this 6x to the 4th, we really don't have any conventional ways to factor this. So we go through the process. We're going to list all possible rational zeros. And then from those possibilities, we're going to do a trial and error method in order to come up with the ones that are our actual factors. So when we list all possible rational zeros, we're going to do a method of P divided by Q. The factors of this last term are going to be the P. The factors of the first term are going to be the Q. So my P factors here, if I'm looking at this, are going to be plus or minus 1 and plus or minus 2. Those are going to be my factors of P. So I'm going to take that, and then we come up with our factors of Q here. For 6, we know it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and 6. So I'm going to come up with everything that you can multiply together in order to get 6. So I can multiply 1 and 6 together. I can multiply 2 and 3. Notice we put plus or minus on everything because technically you can have a negative 1 and a negative 6 to give you a positive 6, right? So you want to go through and list all possible factors, and that's where that comes from. Now, to get your P divided by Q, you just systematically go through and do the division. So you're going to take your 1 divided by 1. Then your 1 divided by 2, your 1 divided by 3, your 1 divided by 6. Then you come over here and you take your 2 divided by 1, 2 divided by 2, 2 divided by 3, 2 divided by 6. So see what this looks like. So the first one that you have is your 1 divided by 1. So 1 divided by 1 is 1. Then your 1 divided by 2 is going to be 1/2. Then your 1 divided by 3 is 1/3. Your 1 divided by 6 is 1/6. Then you go to your 2's. So you're going to take your 2 divided by 1, which is going to be 2. 2 divided by 2. So with this 2 divided by 2, that's the same thing as 1, and we already have that option, so we don't need to write it again. Then you do your 2 divided by 3. That's 2/3, and that's a new one. That kind of got messed up there a little bit. Then lastly, you come over here and you have your 2 divided by 6. And that's 1/3, and we already have that option. So these are all of our options that we have available. This 2 looks a little freaky. Let's try that. And now it's trial and error. And that's just how it goes. So let's do it. First thing, and typically being the operative word, but typically you're going to have either positive or negative one that works. So always start with that one. So when you use synthetic division, and remember, anytime you're doing synthetic division, just like before, our ultimate goal is to get this down to a quadratic. So we want the squared term. So we just keep going through it in order to make that happen. So I'm going to put a 1 in my box to begin with, and then I have this 6, 7, negative 12, and my pen's not working, negative 3, and 2. So drop this 6. 6 times 1 is 6. 6 times 7 is 13. So I have 13 there, giving me a 1. 1 times 1 is 1. So that's a negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. And lo and behold, check that out. We already have a 0. And when you have a 0, then you circle your answer big time. That is one of your zeros, which also means it's one of your factors. Remember, all those words mean the same. A 0, a factor, and an x-intercept. We're going to look at the x-intercepts more when we graph these polynomial functions, but it's still good to know that those words all mean the same. Now, you're going to take this term, this function, 6x cubed plus a 13x squared plus x minus 2 and work with that. The goal is to break it down to a quadratic where your exponent is squared. We started off with the exponent here to the 4th. We now have the exponent down to a 3. We want to go one more step and get that exponent down to a 2 because then we can factor. Now, be smart about it. Don't go through and try to do synthetic division with these fractions. That's crazy talk. My next thing I would try would be a -1 just to see, because it's also an easy number to work with. Then you shoot over here to the 2's and try those until you get some that work. So I'm going to try -1 using these coefficients of 6, 13, 1, and -2, and try it on. Drop that 6. Gives me a -6 for a 7. Gives me a -7, which is -6. And I know that doesn't work. So now we try something else. Still with this same coefficients right here of this cubic, with this to the 3rd power. Use those same coefficients, but now let's try something like 2. So we're going to try 2 and plug that in. 6, 13, 1, and -2. Drop that 6, giving me 12. So there's 25, and that's 50. Wow, this thing's spiraling out of control. I know that's not going to work. Let's try -2. And that's the deal. Trial and error. Keep trying until you get them that work out for you. Drop that 6, gives me a -12. Oh, that's nice. We're coming back down a little bit here with the 1. Now I have a -1, so that's a +2. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. -2 works. Now, back to that same old adage. This is to the 4th power. There's one of my zeros. There's another one of my zeros. And now I have this broken down to be 6x squared plus a 1x minus 1. And then you simply factor that. So I have 3x times 2x with a -1 in the back. I'm going to have +1 and -1 because I want to be able to look at this and say 3 times 1 is 3, -2 still gives me that 1. Now here's the biggest error I see, is people forget this is a 0 and a factor. This is a 0 and a factor. So if we look at our other 2 factors here, we have, remember, anything next to the x is opposite. So I have to have an x minus 1 and an x plus 2. And those are my 4 factors. So I'm charged with factoring into linear factors, and that's where those are. I also have to put my zeros in there. So let's go through here and get our zeros on there as well. So my zeros are just going to be my values. We already know that x is equal to 1 and -2. Now you're going to set each one of the other 2 factors equal to 0 and then solve that. So if you have this 3x minus 1 equals 0, you end up with x is now equal to a positive 1/3 by the time you add 1 here to make that a positive 1, and then you divide by your 3. So I have a 1/3 as one of my options. Then you subtract 1 and divide by 2, giving me a -1/2. And look at this. My options here for a 1, we know is up here as a 1. -2 is up here as a -2. Positive 1/3 is a positive 1/3. -1/2, -1/2. So these are part of my possible rational zeros, just not all of them. Cool. Let's do another one.